In a small town on the edge of the city, nestled between quiet streets and abandoned factories, there was a mechanic named Michael. He wasn't rich. In fact, life had been nothing short of difficult for him. Every day, it seemed like the world was leaning in on him. His hands were rough from years of grease and hard work, his clothes faded from countless days spent under the hot sun, fixing one broken engine after another. Yet, despite all of this, there was something about Michael that was different. He had a heart bigger than most, shaped by years of struggle, but still open to the world. He was a simple man, living in a small, modest house, with only the occasional visitor, or so he thought. One fateful evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the chill of night began to creep in, Michael was locking up his small garage when he heard a faint knock. It was soft at first, barely audible against the hum of the evening breeze. At first, he thought it might be his imagination. But then, the knock came again, this time, a little louder. Curious, and admittedly a bit cautious, Michael stepped towards the sound. What he found stopped him in his tracks. Standing there, in the shadow of his garage, was a woman. She was hunched over, wrapped in an old, worn-out coat that barely shielded her from the cold. Her face was pale, her hair unkempt, and her eyes were the eyes of someone who had been through far too much. And she wasn't alone. Clinging to her side were two small children. One of them, a little boy, seemed to be barely hanging on to his mother's coat. His eyes were wide with hunger, his face thin, and his clothes, much like his mother's, were torn and ragged. The other child, a girl no older than 5, was quiet, her small hands clutching her stuffed toy as if it were the only thing that gave her comfort in the world. The woman looked up at Michael, her eyes full of desperation, and without saying a word, she simply asked for help. It wasn't much, just a simple request to take shelter for the night. I don't know where else to go, she whispered, her voice barely above a tremor. We haven't eaten for days, just one night. Michael stood frozen. His mind raced, his heart pounding in his chest. The weight of the moment, the gravity of her plea, it felt like a million tiny hands gripping at his heart. His first instinct was to turn her away. After all, his life was no easy ride. He had his own struggles to face. He didn't have enough food for himself, let alone 3 more people. He barely had enough money to pay his bills, and yet, something inside of him just couldn't turn them away. It wasn't just pity. It was something deeper, something that spoke to the part of him that remembered what it felt like to struggle, to go without, to be on the edge. All right, Michael said, his voice rough. Come inside, just for tonight. The woman's face lit up with gratitude, her eyes welling up with tears. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking. And so, that night, Michael opened his doors to strangers. He didn't know what to expect, didn't know what this decision would bring, but in that moment, he knew he couldn't leave them out in the cold. As the woman and her children stepped into his small home, Michael did his best to make them comfortable. It wasn't much, a worn couch, a tiny kitchen, a place where he'd never expected anyone else to sit, but it was all he had. He didn't have the resources to offer them a luxurious meal. Instead, he heated up some leftover soup, the last of the food in his kitchen, and served it with a slice of bread. It was the best he could do. As the woman and her children ate, Michael watched quietly from across the room. He didn't speak much, only observing them in the soft light of the small lamp that flickered in the corner. The children, hungry as they were, devoured the food as if they hadn't seen a meal in years. Their mother, though grateful, couldn't help but glance up at Michael every so often, her eyes full of guilt, full of thankfulness. In that moment, something shifted within Michael. A sense of responsibility, a quiet acknowledgement that life was more than just the daily grind, more than the endless repairs and struggling to make ends meet. Here, in this small, humble home, was the raw truth about what it meant to truly care for others. As the night wore on, Michael realized that this was not just about giving shelter to a stranger, it was about recognizing a shared humanity, one that extended far beyond the walls of his garage, far beyond his own struggles. And so, as the night deepened, and the world outside grew colder, Michael sat in the quiet with them. A man of little, offering everything he could, his time, his space, his heart. In that brief moment, he wasn't just a mechanic fixing broken machines, he was someone who had given hope to a family who had none. Little did Michael know that this simple act of kindness would change the course of his life forever. As the hours ticked by, Michael sat quietly in his chair, watching the small family in front of him. The woman had settled on the couch, her 2 children curled up next to her, finally asleep, their bellies full for the first time in days. Michael's heart softened as he looked at them, the mother, her face tired but peaceful now, her children safe for the night. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about this evening. His mind drifted back to his own struggles, the constant worry about bills, repairs, the never-ending grind that seemed to take everything from him. For the first time in a long time, Michael didn't feel the weight of those worries. He felt lighter. The house was still and quiet now, save for the soft sounds of the children's breathing. Michael leaned back in his chair, reflecting on how a single act of kindness, a decision as small as offering shelter for one night, could change everything. He'd opened his home to these strangers. Offered them not just food, but safety, warmth, and, in some small way, hope. As Michael sat there, watching the family sleep, he wondered what had brought them to his doorstep. What circumstances had led them to be hungry, cold, and alone? The woman's story had been brief, but it had been enough to stir something inside of him. She had said she and her children had been wandering for days, seeking shelter from anyone who might be willing to help. She never spoke much about her past, but Michael could tell, it was a life of hardship, one that left scars both physical and emotional. Her clothes, tattered and worn, were a clear sign of the struggle. The small children, too, their faces drawn with hunger, spoke volumes about their journey. But Michael, as he sat in the silence, didn't feel pity. He felt a deep empathy. And it was more than just the act of giving that touched him. It was the realization that, despite everything, the coldness of the world, the endless struggle, it only took a little bit of kindness to change someone's life. As the clock struck midnight, Michael rose from his chair and quietly made his way into the kitchen. He wasn't sure why he did it, but something urged him to prepare a little more food. Not much, just enough to put a warm breakfast on the table in the morning. He found the last of the bread and butter, some leftover eggs. It wasn't much, but it would be enough to show them he cared. Michael wasn't used to having guests, much less ones who needed help. But something about this family made him want to give more, something he couldn't explain. The simple act of making breakfast seemed so insignificant. Yet, as he cracked the eggs and began to fry them, Michael realized that this was more than just feeding someone. It was about sharing what little he had, and in return, he felt a warmth spreading inside him that he hadn't felt in years. The last time he had felt this connected to someone was, well, he couldn't remember. The world often felt like it was working against him. But here, in this quiet kitchen, with the smell of eggs filling the air, Michael felt at peace, a peace that was foreign to him, but one he welcomed with open arms. He finished preparing the breakfast and set the table quietly. As he looked out the window, the first light of dawn free of the night was giving way to the warmth of the morning sun, a new day, full of possibilities. But as he turned back to his guests, he noticed something that tugged at his heart. The woman, though still asleep, was no longer alone in her thoughts. She had stirred slightly, her hand protectively draped over her children, her face now peaceful in the soft glow of the morning light. Michael saw the faintest smile on her lips. That smile, small as it was, meant the world to him. It meant that, for just one night, he had made a difference. The world outside might not have changed. His garage might still need repairs, his bills still unpaid. But inside, in this little house, a family had been given something priceless, a chance to rest, to be safe, and to feel human again. As Michael walked back to his chair, his mind began to turn again. What would he do now? What next? He had never seen himself as the kind of person who could truly make a difference in someone else's life. He wasn't rich, he wasn't powerful, and he certainly didn't have connections that could change lives. But maybe, just maybe, there was something bigger here, a lesson that went beyond just helping someone out for one night. The thought lingered in his mind, like a soft whisper that he couldn't ignore. Maybe his life wasn't just about fixing cars and scraping by. Maybe it was about these moments, the ones that no one could see, but that carried the most meaning. For the first time in a long while, Michael felt like he had a purpose. It wasn't about the money or the material things. It was about giving, about being there when someone needed it most. And as he sat there, looking at the family who had slept under his roof, he realized that he had just made a choice that would ripple through the rest of his life. He didn't know how yet. But somehow, he knew this act would change him forever. The next morning, as the soft light of dawn bathed the room in a golden glow, Michael stood by the window, watching the world wake up. The sound of birds chirping in the distance filled the air, signaling the start of another day. But for Michael, this day felt different. It felt significant. As the smell of breakfast wafted through the small house, the woman stirred, waking to the warmth of the morning. Her children, still curled up next to her, slowly began to stir as well. Michael watched from the corner of the room, his heart quietly hopeful. He had no idea what would happen next. He didn't know if they would be able to stay longer, if this was just a one-night shelter. He didn't even know if they had anywhere else to go after this. But one thing was certain, he couldn't just send them away without knowing more. The woman, her eyes blinking as she adjusted to the morning light, looked at Michael with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. She didn't expect this, didn't expect anyone to care enough to offer a meal, a place to stay, yet here she was, with her children, in the safety of Michael's home. She slowly rose from the couch, brushing a few strands of hair from her face, her movements slow but steady. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice still shaky from the emotions of the night before. "I didn't expect any of this." Michael gave her a gentle smile, the warmth of the moment shining through. "It's no trouble," he said simply. "Please, have a seat. I made some breakfast." The children, sensing that something had changed, now looked up, their small faces brightening as they caught the scent of the food. It had been so long since they had tasted anything fresh, anything warm. Their small hands reached out eagerly, the hunger in their eyes slowly giving way to a tentative hope. As the family sat down to eat, the silence between them was comfortable. There was no awkwardness, no sense of obligation. Just the simple joy of sharing a meal that Michael never thought he would be able to offer in such a way. Michael watched them eat, the small clinks of silverware against plates echoing softly in the room. The world outside, with its noise and chaos, seemed so far away in that moment. For once, he wasn't worrying about bills, work, or the relentless pressure of life. He was simply present, sharing a meal with people who, just hours ago, had been strangers. As the last of the breakfast was finished, the woman looked up at Michael, her expression softer now, filled with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly, her voice steady now, as if the weight of her worries had been lifted, just a little. "You don't need to thank me," Michael replied, his voice sincere. I did what anyone would do." But even as the words left his lips, he knew they weren't entirely true. Not everyone would have opened their door to a stranger in the middle of the night. Not everyone would have made the choice to share what little they had. The woman looked down at her children, her face softening as she stroked their hair. She had been through so much, and yet, there was a quiet strength about her now. A strength that Michael hadn't noticed before. "I don't want to impose," she said after a moment, her gaze flickering between Michael and her children. "But we don't really have anywhere else to go, and I don't know what the next step is." Michael felt a lump form in his throat. He knew she didn't want to ask for more, didn't want to impose. But the reality was clear. She and her children were homeless, and they had nowhere else to turn. As much as Michael wished he could wave a magic wand and solve all of their problems, he knew that wasn't possible. But what he could do was offer more than just a roof over their heads for one night. "You can stay here as long as you need to," he said, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding in his chest. "I can help with finding work, or finding a place to stay. Just don't worry about leaving right away. Take your time." The woman's eyes welled up with tears once more. "Thank you. I don't know how to." Michael raised a hand to stop her. "There's no need. You're welcome here." For a moment, all three of them, the woman and her children, simply sat there, absorbing the offer. It was more than just a place to stay. It was more than food. It was hope, it was a second chance. And in that silence, as the world outside continued to turn, something in Michael's heart shifted again. He had given them shelter, yes, but it was more than that. He had given them dignity. He had shown them that there was kindness left in the world. And in doing so, he had found something precious for himself, purpose. The woman looked at him with a quiet smile, and in that smile, Michael saw not just gratitude, but the beginning of something else, something that, while still unknown, felt as though it could be the start of a new chapter, one filled with connection, compassion, and shared humanity. And as the day began to unfold, Michael found himself no longer just a mechanic fixing broken machines, but a man who had been given the rare gift of changing someone's life, even if just for a moment. In the quiet moments that followed, with the family safe and together, Michael realized that sometimes, the smallest acts, the ones that seem so simple, are the ones that leave the biggest marks on the heart. Days passed, and the family remained in Michael's small home. What had started as a one-night favor soon stretched into a week, then two. The woman, whose name was Sarah, had started to regain her strength. Her children, too, seemed to come alive with every passing day. Michael, in his quiet way, had become a part of their world, and they, a part of his. He had made room for them, not just in his house, but in his heart. Every morning, Sarah would wake up early, grateful for another day, and begin taking care of the children. She had found small ways to help around the house, washing dishes, tidying up, and even attempting to cook a meal, though Michael quickly stepped in whenever her cooking turned into a disaster. Her smile, though, was always warm, and it filled the room, a reminder that she still had a spark of hope despite everything. The children, too, had settled into a routine. The boy, Daniel, who had been so quiet and withdrawn at first, began to play in the small yard outside. The girl, Lila, seemed to bloom with each new day. She was always the first to greet Michael in the morning, her tiny hands holding up drawings she made with crayons, showing him everything from stick figures to hearts and stars. Michael couldn't help but smile each. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough. It was a start. Each evening, she returned to Michael's home, tired but grateful, with a paycheck in her pocket. The kids began to thrive even more, their smiles more frequent, their laughter filling the air. Michael, seeing the changes in them, couldn't help but feel that this small act of kindness, giving them a car, had set something bigger in motion. As the days went on, Sarah's confidence grew. She was able to save a little money here and there, slowly making a plan for the future. Michael's home no longer felt so small and lonely. It felt full. Full of life, of hope, and of possibilities. And through it all, Michael learned something profound. He learned that true wealth wasn't measured by the size of a paycheck, or the things you could buy. It was measured by the lives you touched, the difference you made, and the love you shared. It wasn't just about giving someone a place to stay, or fixing a car. It was about restoring hope, and in doing so, restoring something in yourself. As Sarah and the children started to get back on their feet, Michael knew one thing for certain: this family had changed his life, just as much as he had changed theirs. As weeks passed, Michael's life began to take on a new rhythm. The work in his garage continued, though it no longer felt like the burden it once had. There was something different in the air now, something lighter, something that filled the quiet spaces with purpose. Sarah, with her newfound job, began to save a little more each week. She was cautious, but the hope in her heart was undeniable. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning to truly live again. And it wasn't long before she found a small apartment for herself and the children, a modest place, but one that felt like a dream to them. A place to call their own. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. And that, in itself, was a victory. Every evening after work, Sarah would return to Michael's house, her face a little brighter each time. She'd bring home small treats for the kids, things they hadn't had in so long, candies, little toys, and sometimes even a small bouquet of flowers. The children, especially Daniel, had become a big part of Michael's life. Daniel had grown stronger, both physically and emotionally. He was no longer the quiet, withdrawn boy who had been afraid to even look anyone in the eye. He was beginning to smile more, to laugh, and even to play outside with the other kids in the neighborhood. Lila, too, had become a light in the house, always running around with her drawings, eager to show them to Michael. The little girl's imagination was boundless, her creativity something Michael had never expected to see in such a young child who had already faced so many hardships. But there she was, bringing life to every corner of Michael's home with her artwork. For the first time in a long time, Michael was part of a family that had taught him more about resilience, hope, and the power of kindness than he ever could have imagined. It wasn't about big gestures or grand acts of heroism. It was about the small things, the quiet moments, the shared meals, the warm smiles, and the simple acts of giving that seemed to weave an unspoken bond between them all. One evening, as the sun set and the cool night air began to settle over the town, Michael found himself sitting outside on his porch, watching the stars slowly twinkle into view. The children had just gone to bed, and Sarah had stayed behind to tidy up before heading back to the apartment. She came out after a while, sitting beside him on the old wooden chair. "I don't know how to thank you," Sarah said, her voice soft, her words carrying a weight of gratitude that was almost too much to bear. "You've already thanked me," Michael replied with a warm smile, his eyes still fixed on the horizon. "You don't have to say anything. I'm just glad to see you and the kids doing better." "But I feel like I owe you so much more than that," she said, shaking her head. "Without you, we would have had nothing. I don't know where we'd be." Michael's expression softened. "Sometimes, we all need a little help. It's just life, you know. We all go through hard times, and we all need someone to lean on." Sarah smiled faintly, the lines of worry around her eyes slowly fading. "You didn't just give us shelter, Michael. You gave us back our dignity, you gave us a chance. And you've shown me what it really means to be kind. To give without expecting anything in return." Michael looked at her then, his voice quiet but filled with something profound. "That's what we're all here for, Sarah. To help each other. It doesn't take much. It's the small things that matter, the things no one sees." The air was still now, the soft rustling of the leaves the only sound around them. It was peaceful, and in that peace, Michael felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had never expected this. He had never imagined that his life would change in this way, through a single decision, a simple act of kindness that had started as a small thing, but had become something much, much more. He hadn't just helped them survive, he had helped them rebuild. And in turn, they had helped him rebuild his own heart. As Sarah stood to leave for the night, she turned to Michael one last time. "Thank you, for everything." Michael nodded, watching her disappear into the night, her silhouette fading into the distance. He didn't need her thanks. He had already received what he needed, a sense of peace, of purpose, and the knowledge that he had made a difference. That, after all, was all anyone could ever hope for. The next morning, Michael woke to the sound of laughter from outside. Daniel and Lila were playing in the yard again, their carefree giggles filling the air. Sarah, too, had come by early, her arms full of groceries. There was something new in the way they interacted now, something deeper than before. It was as if they had all become part of one another's story, a story of survival, of kindness, and of the quiet but powerful bonds that formed when people decided to open their hearts. As Michael went to work that day, he found himself working with a renewed sense of purpose. The cars, the engines, the repairs, they were still there, as they always had been. But now, every part he fixed, every job he completed, felt different. It wasn't just about the mechanics anymore. It was about life, and the way even the smallest act could change everything. And so, with each turn of the wrench, each lift of the hood, Michael worked with a new understanding, an understanding that, perhaps, the greatest repair of all is the one we do to our hearts. As time moved on, the changes that had once felt small and incremental now seemed monumental. Michael's life had become a tapestry of moments woven together by the people who had come to mean so much to him: Sarah, Daniel, and Lila. What began as a single act of kindness had rippled through his world, transforming not just theirs, but his own life in ways he couldn't have imagined. Every time he saw Sarah returning from work with a new spark in her eyes, a quiet pride in her step, he was reminded of the journey they'd been through together. The once desperate woman who had knocked on his door with nothing but a faint glimmer of hope had turned into someone who could stand tall, her head held high, and her children beside her, thriving. And it wasn't just Sarah who had changed. Michael had transformed, too. He had become more than just a mechanic. He had become someone who understood, deeply, the value of community, of connection, and of giving without asking for anything in return. He had learned, through Sarah's gratitude and the children's laughter, that kindness had the power to heal not only others, but oneself. One afternoon, Michael stood outside his garage, wiping his hands on a rag after finishing a long day's work. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the town, and the air felt just right, calm, full of promise. Daniel and Lila came running over, their laughter echoing in the stillness. Daniel, once quiet and withdrawn, now ran ahead of his sister, a bright smile lighting up his face as he called to Michael. "Hey, Mr. Michael. Want to play ball?" The question caught Michael off guard. He had never been much of a player, not in the way other people were. But something in his chest tugged at the request. These children who had once been shadows of their former selves, now wanted him to be part of their world, part of their joy. How could he refuse? He smiled, nodding. "Sure, kid. Let's play." As they tossed the ball back and forth, Michael felt something stir inside him. It wasn't just the fun of the game, or the fact that the kids were enjoying themselves. It was the realization that life, in its most simple and profound moments, was about connection. It was about sharing time and space with those who mattered, those who had the power to change your life, just as you had the power to change theirs. That evening, as the stars began to appear in the sky, Sarah joined them outside, watching her children play with a sense of pride and peace that only mothers know. She looked at Michael, her eyes filled with gratitude once more. "You've given us so much," she said quietly, standing beside him. Michael shook his head. "I didn't do anything special. I just did what felt right." But Sarah, with the wisdom of someone who had seen both hardship and hope, looked at him and smiled. "You did more than that. You gave us a chance. And that's everything." The words settled in Michael's heart, sinking deep into him like seeds planted in fertile soil. What had once been a small act of kindness, offering shelter for one night, had turned into something much bigger. It had turned into a relationship. A family. A life lived with purpose and love. That night, as Michael lay in bed, he reflected on everything that had happened. He thought about how easily he could have turned Sarah and her children away that night, how easily he could have closed the door. He thought about all the times he had let his own struggles keep him from reaching out to others, from offering kindness. But now, as he lay in the stillness, he realized that opening that door had opened more than just his home. It had opened his heart. Life, he understood now, was never about waiting for the perfect moment. It was about showing up. It was about the little decisions, the ones that don't seem like much at the time, but that, in the end, are everything. The next morning, as Michael prepared to head to his garage, Sarah and the children came out to join him for breakfast. It was a small, simple meal, just eggs and toast, but it was full of warmth, of laughter, of shared stories. The kind of breakfast that made you feel like you were exactly where you were meant to be. And as Michael looked around at the family he had once only dreamed of having, he realized that this was his purpose. It wasn't in the work he did, or the things he had, or the money he earned. His purpose was in the people he helped, the connections he made, and the love he shared. That was what life was truly about. That was the real wealth. As he stepped outside, ready to face another day, Michael felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that the journey he had started when he opened his door to Sarah and her children was just the beginning of something that would last a lifetime. A lifetime of kindness, of change, of love. The end. Thank you for following along. I hope this story resonates with you. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel and also tell us the country you are watching from.